I got interested in the subject of UFOs back in the mid-1960s when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, and I don't know why I got interested in it, but I just did, and it was a question of relaxation, reading in it for relaxation, like people read science fiction or mystery stories or something like that, and the more I read in it, the more I realized that there might be something to this, and it just captured my imagination. And that was a long time ago. I'm still doing it. It's been almost my entire adult life. I met Bud Hopkins in 1982, and he got me interested in abductions because I was just strictly involved with UFO research, UFO theories. But the problem with looking at the outside shells of objects, UFOs, is you can only find out so much. There's a finite amount of information from seeing the outside shells of objects, no matter what they're doing. The abduction phenomenon gets you inside the objects, and it allows you to talk about who these beings are, what they want, what they're doing, motivations, goals, purposes. With studying UFOs, you can't do that. But studying UFOs is still very, very important, and all the information that we have about the UFO phenomenon today has already been known since the mid-1970s. But what the information does today is that it adds to the verification of the phenomenon. So everything is a matter of patterns, and when you get patterns that are just the same massively over the decades, one would assume that would have convinced people that something strange is indeed happening. I'm not sure that has convinced people yet, but it's the only way we have of trying to convince people that something is happening. In order to do that, I have to backtrack quite a bit. We have to talk about different things before I can just jump to that conclusion. First of all, the phenomenon itself began probably around the late 19th century, probably 1880s, I'm guessing, sometime in that period. And the reason that we know that is number one, through family history. Number two, the number of abductees in the world and in North America, and cases that we have that date back to the 1930s that we've looked at. My colleague Bud Hopkins examined the case from the 1920s some years ago, and I found a letter that was obviously an abduction event from 1917 that was in the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization files. An elderly man who wrote to them back in the 1960s about something that had happened to him in 1917. So we can date it back. There are ways to date it back, but it does not extend beyond that, nor does the UFO phenomenon as we know it. In other words, it does not come from the Greeks or from Egyptians, right? There's the evidence for that is 100% speculation. 100%. There's no evidence at all, and it's just what people think of. So now, having said that, there have been polls conducted about how many people are abductees. The latest poll said that in the United States, there's only 350,000 abductees. Other polls have which just ask people whether they are an abductee or not, and the answer usually is about 1 million people. In the poll that Bud Hopkins and I took in 1991, which had its problems, and when we adjusted for the numbers, it came out to about 2% of North Americans, and which came out to millions of people. That is probably more, even though it's the highest number, and you would think, well, just go with 1 million because it's between 350,000, and the numbers were actually a lot higher in our poll, and we already cut it down drastically to get to 2%. And so, and not only that, but thousands and thousands and thousands of people have written to me and to other UFO researchers around the world about their experiences. That means that they have to know that they are an abductee, and they have to find the sites on the internet, like me, for example, and I'm not so easy to find, and then look at a questionnaire and look for a place somewhere hidden in my site where they can write to me about their experiences and ask questions and all that. So, and I get many thousands. So the question then is, why are there so many people, and no matter what it is, and why is this a global phenomenon? This is not a North American phenomenon exclusively. It's also Latin American. It's European. It's Asian. It's everywhere. Now, when I say everywhere, I can't really say that. All I can say is that it's global, because I don't know what's happening in Tibet. And I don't know what's happening in Myanmar, Burma. I don't know. I haven't gotten any letters from there. So I don't know. But we do get letters from and everywhere else practically, and email, and so we know that it's global. So it's large, it's global. That means that there has to be a tremendous amount of effort behind this. This is not a situation where they're just looking at flora and fauna. This is not where they're experimenting on people. They're not learning about us. If this has gone on for over 100 years, and it's a global phenomenon, it doesn't take an advanced civilization a whole lot of time to learn about us, particularly physiologically. You take a couple of specimens, and you can pretty much go from there. You can expand from there that all humans are basically alike, no matter what they look like. Inside, they're all the same. It doesn't take long. So what we thought years ago was that this was an experiment, that they were experimenting on us, that they were studying us, that they were learning about us. That evidence did not hold. The evidence just wasn't there. What we thought was evidence turned out to be not evidence when we learned more. We learned that the examinations, in quotes, that take place on a table are not the reason for abductions, and are never the reason for abductions, if I can use that word. There's always another reason. Now, that may not be the case with babies or with 3-year-olds or 2-year-olds, so but I can't really tell then. But for adults, there's always another reason. Now, the reason might be, and this comes from the very first cases that we ever looked at, the Antonio Villas-Boas case in 1957 in Brazil, and the Barney and Betty Hill case in 1961 in New Hampshire. Both of those cases had something in common, and that was they had reproductive aspects to them. Now, Barney and Betty Hill did not know about Antonio Villas-Boas because his case was not even publicized until 1966. Consequently, they had no knowledge that Antonio Villas-Boas was talking about something reproductive. He said that he had relations, so to speak, physical relations, sexual relations with a female who looked human. And he said, whether this is true or not, we don't know and we'll never know, but he said that after these relations took place, she put her hand on her stomach and she pointed upwards, presumably somewhere outside of the earth or whatever. And he said he felt like he was being used as a stallion to improve their stock. The problem with Antonio Villas-Boas was, as we learned early on, he was an illiterate Brazilian peasant. That's what we learned. That was the line on him. That was what he was. So how much could you trust somebody who's making this crazy claim that he was kidnapped by aliens? It's totally crazy. Well, it turns out he was not an illiterate Brazilian peasant. He was, in fact, a law student and became an attorney, and his father apparently was a prosperous rancher in the area. So he was an intelligent person who understood fully what he was saying, and from what I can tell, did not vary from his story. Barney and Betty Hill did us a favor. Well, Barney did. Barney had sperm taken from him. But he was so embarrassed about that when a book was written about his experiences called The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller, he had John Fuller take that out of the book because he didn't want people to know. That was his gift to us. Because when other guys began to say they're taking sperm from me, they couldn't blame it on Barney Hill because it was written in a book. I didn't learn about this until 1976 when Betty Hill told me that that's what had happened. That reproductive aspect has stayed absolutely constant throughout the abduction phenomenon everywhere, which is kind of astonishing. From the very beginning, from the first cases ever, the first cases we found, there were many of them before. So what we're looking at then is a phenomenon that appeared to be taking place early on, very rarely. But in fact, we know that it was taking place with a huge number of people around the world, and it wasn't rare at all. That meant that it was being done in secret. Now, secrecy has there's a lot of different aspects to secrecy. In fact, one of the chapters I wrote in the threat was the reasons for secrecy. I almost got it completely right, but not quite. Secrecy has more to it than what I wrote, which it has to do with protecting a fetus and so forth. But without secrecy, there would be no abduction program. We would find some way to stop it. And secrecy is a component part of a larger program that cannot exist without secrecy. So what we're looking at is a secret program. Now, that also suggests a weakness. And the weakness is we might be able to stop it. If we couldn't stop it, then it wouldn't be secret. I mean, that's just simple common sense. So it also means that there are very highly advanced technological society that can keep secrecy and do everything that they're doing. This means, and of course this has to be, because if they come from somewhere else and they have technology, it has to be more advanced than us. That's what we see in terms of these beings. Very advanced technology, but not just physical technology, which one would expect, a neurological technology that we could never, ever have imagined. And that is the ability to prevent people from remembering what they were saying, remember what happened to them, rather, which is neurobiological technology, a neurobiology that is very different than ours, and can control people from a distance. In other words, when an abduction event begins, people cannot phone for help. They cannot phone for help. Here in the United States, they can't dial 911. They can't run. They cannot reach underneath their pillow that they're sleeping, that's under their pillow in their bed or on their couch or on their lap, and blow somebody away who's coming into their house who happens to be small and gray. They cannot do that. They can't wake their spouse if the spouse is asleep. They can't. They are controlled from a distance. That is impossible for us to imagine how that works. Impossible. How long is that? How far away is that distance? Is it 1,000,000 miles? Probably not. Is it 1,000 miles? Probably not. Is it 1,000 feet? Maybe. You know, that's with now you're in the realm of possibility. Not only that, but with what I used to call mind scan, and I invented that word in Secret Life, and I've learned to hate it. And I now call neural engagement, which is a $5 word in place of where a 50-cent word would do, but it's more accurate. Neural engagement. They can connect into people's eyes who are lying on a table and their eyes are open. They can't close their eyes and they can't avert their eyes and they can't do anything. And this being will come and stare into their eyes at a distance of 2 inches or touching foreheads. And what that person is doing almost certainly, and I can't tell for absolute, I can't be positive, but almost certainly, is hooking in to their optic nerve and using it as a conduit to go to any neurological site in the brain, and they can innervate any site that they want. So people feel things, they see things, they have all these memories that they think are happening to them that aren't happening, and all sorts of things like that. That's a very advanced technology. I wish I could do that. I would like to do that. That would be fine. So what we're looking at is a very different form of life. One that is neurobiologically advanced and obviously technologically advanced. But that neurological bias stuff that's different. That is very, very different, because what that means is they can control us and to do whatever they want. And so far they have only wanted certain things, but who knows what they'll want in the future. So now the question is, you have lots and lots of people, a tremendous amount of effort involved in this, a lot of personnel, a lot of UFOs, a lot of people being abducted around the world. Then why? That's the question you asked originally. Why? But you can see that this is leading to something. All this effort, all this technology, this secrecy, the ability to control people, all that stuff. They're doing this for a reason. As I realized in the threat, in my book, The Threat, that this was a program. This wasn't an experiment. This was a program, and as a program, it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was goal-directed. They were doing it for a reason. There was a reason to do this. So the reason came clear at the end of The Threat, where these beings, gray aliens, and I should say the insect-like ones too, the insectoids as I call them, who are the instigators of this program. They are the ones who are putting this, everybody else is following orders. Everybody else has a function within a hierarchy, although it's not really a hierarchy. It's different, but you can use that word. The word is okay. But all the rest are workers in this program, and so abductees will be brought in to a room, and when you're on board the object, your brain is on mute. Your brain is addled. You're not remembering anything. You're not remembering what happened to you an hour ago. Your short-term memory is short-circuited, and so you look like, as people say, when they're walking in a hallway sometimes, they'll see another abductee walking towards them, and they'll say, that person looks like a zombie. Oh my God, he's slacked. But that person who's looking at the abductee who I'm working with is thinking in his mind that my person looks like a zombie. Everybody looks like a zombie there. That word is used over and over again when people describe what the other people look like. I've heard that so many times. That's why I know that it's commonly used. So their attention is directed to a screen on the wall. And the screen on the wall is a picture, a normal picture of normal human life, people doing things. Now, I've discussed this many times before, and I'll say it again, but one of the pictures was, well, it's a motion picture, it's a moving picture, of a picnic. And I use this one because it's so typical. It's a picnic, and it's of people around the grill, barbecue, whatever, playing ball, kids, adults. Now, all communication on board a UFO with abductees is telepathic, which leads to all sorts of problems for remembering it, because if a communication is just something that you hear inside your head, what would be the problem with listening to your own thoughts and thinking that they're coming from the outside and getting them confused and saying, he's telling me it's a pregnancy, he's taking a pregnancy test. And the answer is, there's no problem there at all. People do this all the time. However, that's just the way it is. The communication is all telepathic, and they hear in their mind, can you tell the difference between us and you? And the person looks at the screen and says, huh? What? What do you mean difference? Everybody looks the same. There isn't any difference. Everybody's the same. And they hear, see, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? Soon we will all be together. Soon everybody will be happy. Soon everyone will know his place. It will be wonderful soon. Now, when you hear something like that once, it is not evidence. It's confabulation. It's somebody might be inventing this. How do you know? But I began to hear this from a lot of people who were saying the same thing, who were not aware that other people were saying that, and it all started at a specific time. So, and then the aliens were just saying the same thing. Soon there's going to be a change. Soon you're going to be working in the change, and you'll know when things happen. You'll remember things that you're supposed to remember later on when the change comes, and the change will happen, and there's going to be this change. Well, first of all, I wasn't sure of what the change actually meant, and I certainly didn't know what the word soon meant. Does that mean 10 minutes from now, or does that mean 10 million years from now? You know, what does soon mean? Now I heard these things in the 1990s. Starting in 2003, I began to hear something different. Now with abductions like UFOs, you don't hear a lot of different things. There was a certain point where I thought I'd learned pretty much all I was going to learn. But then I began to hear things that were different. And that in fact, people were now, one person described how he had a friend. And he'd forgotten. He'd come to me we had like 10 different sessions together, hypnosis sessions, and in about the sixth one or fifth one, I can't remember which, he remembered that he had a friend. And I said, well, that's interesting. I've got a friend too, you know. I mean, everybody's got friends. I mean, so he said, no. He said, I totally forgotten about him. And this friend was a really good friend of his, a close friend of his, who he's in contact with all the time now, starting recently. And he's gone here with him, he's gone there with them, they've gone to restaurants, they've done this, they've done that. They did all sorts of things together. They went fishing together, and I had never heard that before. I had heard that that there were hybrids who attached themselves to people, but who would not be considered a friend as you or I would know a friend, where they would just go out and have dinner. You know, that wasn't going to happen. And especially when they had not remembered that they had this friend ever. So he remembered this, and then out came this whole world that started at a certain point of being friends with this guy, this hybrid as it turns out, and all the things that they did together over the years, including having this hybrid tell this guy not to see me an hour before he came to me. Nearby, in a park nearby where I could walk to. However, as I said, that's not evidence. You have to wait for other people to start telling you similar things, and then people did. And what this whole thing means ultimately, and what the book is, my new book is going to be about, is this is an integration program into the society. Hybridization ultimately comes down to beings who look like who are human. In every conceivable way, every possible way, they are human, except in one way. They can control us, and we cannot control them. That part stays intact. And those are the beings who the aliens have said will be integrating into the society, because soon we will all be together. Then I began to hear stories of abductees who were helping them move in, helping and teaching them how to drive, and teaching them all sorts of things here in apartments. And I thought, the change is upon us. This is the change. This is what they've been talking about. Now, are they here just to live here and just be nice and quiet and silent and all that? I don't think so. This is a huge program. You got to remember that the enormity of what we're dealing with here, it's enormous in every conceivable way. If they can control us and we cannot control them, that automatically makes us a second-class species and not a second-class citizen. It makes humans second-class species. I don't like that. And so now the question is, why are they doing this? And the answer is, I don't know. If this were psychological, and people were just making this up for whatever reason, I don't care what reason, for whatever reason, we'd know, because they'd make that part up too. Because it fulfills prophecies in the Bible, because they want our resources, because their planet is dying, because they love him, because we're screwing up the planet and they want to fix it. Who knows? They would just make that up. But abductees don't know. They have they're not told, and therefore they don't know. And consequently, I've learned to dislike this phenomenon enormously, and fear it, I must say. And I'm 71 years old, and I'm glad that I'm 71 years old now, and I'm glad that I'm not going to live to be 107. And but I fear for my kids, for my children, so to speak. So it's not something that I ever expected when I began to do this research. It's the farthest thing from my mind, I must say. And but now it's the only thing that has meaning. Everything that we know points to this, and nothing that we know points away if you know how to research this subject competently. I think I have a degree of competence in it. I look around, it's an awful lot of people who do hypnosis with abductees. They don't have the slightest idea what they're doing. It's awful. But that's the conclusions that I have come to personally. Anyway. Excellent question. Thank you. That question is not often asked to me, and it begins with UFOs. If it's secret, why do we see UFOs? My guess, this is a guess, is that you're looking at the limits of technology. UFOs are, I hate to say this, but they are not visible most of the time. If I use the word invisible, it sounds crazy. If I say they're not visible, it sounds okay, you know. But sometimes they are. I think it's the limits of technology. They are not perfect. It's the same way with humans. There's what I call an error rate. They make errors. And the errors we find with people remembering when they shouldn't. Maybe 95% of the people who are abductees in the United States and Canada or in France or wherever else do not know that they're abductees. They know that they've had weird experiences, but the society in which they live provides a menu of explanations for what happened to them. They've seen ghosts, they've traveled in the astral plane, they've seen deceased relatives, they've had, maybe it was a near-death experience or something, although they weren't near-death, and then they, whatever. And, but, so there's certain things, religious figures, that's big, angels, there's certain things that the society allows within a paradigm of normality. And they say, oh, well, that's probably what happened to me. That's why I am a spiritual person, because I saw angels, you know, I know. And so you have that. Some people remember things. They shouldn't, and they're not supposed to. And of the many abduction events they've had, they'll remember some little pieces of 1 or 2 or 3, and they know something is going on that's not right. Those are the people who we see. Those are the people who come forward. 95% of people who are abductees don't know it. In other words, the secrecy program is extremely successful, but it is not 100%. They make other errors. There's an error rate, which I can expand on if you want, but there's an error rate where they'll return people to the wrong place after an abduction. They go to the wrong bed, the wrong apartment, or they'll be deposited outside their house. The house is locked from the inside. I had one woman who opened to get into her house by breaking patio doors. There were glass doors with a baseball bat to get back in the house. She couldn't, the house was locked. It was the middle of the night. Now, I've said some things that debunkers latch onto. Middle of the night, asleep, things like that. The majority of cases that I have looked at, which is over 1,150 instances of abductions, the majority take place when a person is not asleep. That ends the sleep paralysis argument. It's not a great majority, but it is a majority. It doesn't matter anyway. It has nothing to do with sleep. This is the explanation du jour. It recycles every decade. It comes back. People don't know what's gone on in the past. They bring it back, and they all say it's sleep paralysis, and it's not. People are abducted in groups and can confirm each other's abductions. Families, oftentimes, but sometimes strangers. When people are abducted, they're physically missing from their normal environment. They're not there. Nobody's ever been found during an abduction. The answer is yes. In one of the books that I'll be writing, I will talk about the fact that the book I'm writing now is about how hybrids are integrated into the society. What is the process? What is the bureaucracy involved? How does this happen? It's more complicated than I had originally envisioned. But another book I'll be writing about is what they did to a woman who was talking to me constantly about what was happening to her. She had a brain chemistry which allowed her to remember a tremendous amount. It was unusual, although I have had other people like this. But this was unusual because I had access to her from a distance for a year through Skype and through other ways. So I knew what was happening with her. Well, we had over 100 sessions. Let's put it that. I looked at over 100 events over just a couple of year period, so it was a lot. They tried to get her to stop talking to me, and she refused. They could not get her to stop talking to me. So they tried to get me to stop talking to her. And fun and games ensued. Then I never saw one in person. Everything was done through computer and all that. But it scared the hell out of me, I have to admit. And eventually she, it ended favorably. She simply stopped talking to me. It was crazy, of course, as the whole subject always is. It was crazy, and this was crazy too. But my family was in a little bit of an uproar, and I was in an uproar, and this poor woman, eventually, when she realized what was happening, protected me by just breaking off. The object is to keep this secret. Security was always there. People would say, they would tell me that this is what they told the alien. He said, I'm remembering everything and I'm telling it to Dave Jacobs. And they would say, that's not good. Don't do that. You're endangering future generations. This is bad. This is bad. Don't do that. Now get up on the table. And that would be it. Once you get the change, once you get integration into the society, then security went sky high. Then security was on a level that I had never experienced before. Then I did become a threat. Then I was something that had to be looked at. I was there. They couldn't let that drop. But beforehand, and for most people, security is not a problem. They don't care. Eventually the abductee stops. Two things happen with an abductee. They get tired of it. They get tired of remembering it. They know what's going on. They figured it out. Now let me get on with my life, they say. They don't tell me that, but that's how they feel. And they just stop coming. They might have come 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, and eventually they get car trouble, as I call it. They call me up and they say, I can't make today's appointment, David. The car's in the garage and there's something wrong with it, and I know I'll never see them again. That's the signal to me that they've had enough. And the way I look at it is I've won a victory. They're not obsessing on it. They're leading a normal life. They've put it off to the side. They know it's still happening to them. And there's that. There's the other way, which is the aliens convinced them never to talk to me again, and that has happened. One time I was doing a 10th session with a guy, and he was lying on a daybed, and suddenly he just sat bolt upright, and he said, I shouldn't be telling you this. And he sat up, and that was it. And then I never had another session with him. He refused. None whatsoever. None. One hybrid said that this woman had, who he was dealing with, had music on her computer. As he said, it was very annoying. And he was a human-style hybrid. Now, in the thread, I wrote about two things in terms of aliens, thinking that including tall and small gray aliens, and that they live in a telepathic society. And with a telepathic society, there are certain functions of the brain that are not going to be involved there. For example, music, you hear through your ears. But if they're not listening to words through their ears, if they're only telepathic, then the idea of having music is something that's would be very foreign to them, because music is a form of expression. And from what we can tell, there's no art, there's no music, there's no poetry. There's no sarcasm in telepathy. There's no irony. There's no a wink and a nod. There's nothing like that. Everything is straightforward and logical. There is a slight amount of amusement. That we do find, a slight amount. More so with the gray aliens, who I now think are hybrids, than with the pure aliens, who are the insect-like ones. There's no amusement there. The arts are obviously unique to humans. I don't care if you can get a chimpanzee to paint or an elephant to paint on the arts are unique to humans of all the animals on Earth. They may be unique to humans of all the animals everywhere, for all we know. But it's a very, very, very important part of human life. Does that mean that the ones who are moving in and who are human in every way, can they ultimately adjust and learn to like the arts, whatever they are? The answer is maybe. It's possible, yes. But in terms of aliens, no. And there's nothing that is aesthetic on board a UFO. Nothing at all. Everything is strictly sterile. There's no colors to speak of, even. It's not. We don't even know if they see color the way we do. We would assume that they would have to for being functional, but we don't know. However, their mentality, their makeup is very different than ours. Very different. The insect-like ones, very different. Now you'll notice I have not said anything about reptilians. As reptilians, as I call them. This is unusual. There are reports of reptilian-type beings on board. Some have scales, some look like alligators, some look like snakes, some look different, some look weird, some look like... People will sometimes draw them and they look like gray aliens. Well, they're interpreting as reptilians. And people are frightened of them. Oh, get him away from me. Oh, he's horrible, he's terrible, he's scaring me. And I say, well, is he threatening you? No. Well, is he saying horrible things to you? No. Well, what is he doing? Well, nothing, but I hate him, I just hate him. And so he projects threat in some way. But what he does is the same thing that all the rest of them do. He's just part of the program. He's doing his functions. That person's lying on a table or whatever he's doing it. Then you have to think about the concept of hybridization again. Because he's part of this workforce. And then you have to start thinking about, is this the first time that these insectilians have ever done a hybridization program? First time ever, and we're it, wouldn't you know? Isn't that amazing? First time it's ever happened, and we're the ones. What are the chances of that? Then you look at the reptilians and you think, aha, these might be from other groups that they've worked with over the years, if I can use that term. Right. So in other words, the book I'm writing now has different viewpoints on different things. So. Here's the problem, as I said in the beginning. Everything that could be learned about UFOs was already learned in the mid-70s. Books were written about effects of UFOs on automobiles and electrical and mechanical interference, the effects of UFOs on people, effects of the UFOs on the environment and plants and this and that, articles and books, and it just goes on, and how many people have seen UFOs and how long a UFO was there and what colors were a UFO was at night and what kind of maneuvers a UFO had, on and on and on. And we already knew that from the 70s. So everything is a matter of validation. Well, you can only validate so much as well before you begin to lose interest. And the fact that there's another problem here. And the main problem here is that the scientific and academic community have gone from being mildly interested in it to having no interest whatsoever and being hostile to the subject. The hostility in the academic community towards UFOs and especially abductions is greater now than it has ever been in the history of the phenomenon. And I think that there's 3 reasons for that. These are not in order of their importance, but the number 1 reason, the conspiracy theorists, which would have scientists and academics believe that this phenomenon is happening and that the government knows all about it and is covering up their studies of it, and they've never heard anything about it ever. That's a hard one for any scientist or academic to overcome. It's really tough. Another one is abductions. You mean to say that they're coming from zillions of light years away from here and they're kidnapping people for no particular reason over and over again? You mean to tell me that that's what they're doing? You want me to believe that? That's a tough one. That's a tough one. And the fact that in cable TV, there's all sorts of shows about UFOs and some about abductions and this and that. They're all over the place. That makes them just another component, just another part of popular culture, like ghosts, like any other forms of popular culture that you see on television. It just becomes one of them, and not something that's different, special. Consequently, academics and scientists now they've given up. They don't care. It doesn't interest them anymore. Back in 2002 or 2003, I can't remember when, I gave a paper at a MUFON conference where I talked about the problem of building an academic or a scientific community. And what I did, one of the things I did was I counted up the number of people with advanced degrees, MAs and PhDs and MDs, doctorates of any form, who had lent their name to UFO organizations to be printed in their MUFON journal or the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization newsletters or bulletin, and you know from NICAP and all that. And I came up with over 1,200 people over the years who had lent their names to be printed up, as opposed to the ones who were studying it or looking at it without anybody knowing. There are no lists like that anymore. MUFON has stopped. They used to have a list in their yearly convention of all the consultants, and now there isn't one. The UFO, there are academics and scientists who are interested in this subject. It's very small. The situation is awful. It's worse now than it's ever been. It's horrible. It's terrible. And so those are the main reasons, conspiracies, abductions, and popular culture, I think, personally.